Good afternoon, everybody, or good morning, depending on the time zone you're at. It's 1 minute after 4 here in Amsterdam, so let's get started with today's webinar. My name is Purdy, and I'll be moderating today's call. And our presenter today is Sjoerd Alkema. He is Content Services Director. Um, Today we will talk about migrations to Office 365, and as example, we will take IBM FileNet. And let's see if you're prepared for such a migration. I hope we can get that out of this session today. If you have any questions during today's webinar, you can use the chat box and we'll try to get to answer your questions as soon as possible. And the webinar is being recorded. It takes something like 45 minutes usually, and we will send that recording to you either today or tomorrow. So yes, I'm glad that everybody is in. Well, most of the people are in. I think some people are sorting out their audios. Doing this webinar, we don't have any problems with the coronavirus. So thanks everybody for being here. And I think I'd like to hand things over to Sjoerd.
Yes, thank you, Purdy.
Welcome, Sjoerd.
Thank you. And welcome everybody who has joined. As Purdy mentioned already, my name is Sjoerd Alkema and I'm responsible for Xilio Content Services. And to further introduce myself, I've been working in content services for around 15 years. And for this specific webinar, it's also interesting to mention that before I went to Xilio 5 years ago, I was working with Capgemini, and I was working very, very closely together with the IBM ECM team, building propositions towards the market. Although this is, as Purdy said, an example of one of the many legacy migrations we encounter, I think FileNet is probably the most present, as the old big suites in the USA. So we encounter it quite a lot, but still there's some piece of my heart very connected to IBM ECM. So it's good to know. All right, the webinar agenda for today. So I first want to talk a little bit about the market dynamics that we see from a migration standpoint, what's happening right now. Then IBM FileNet. What am I going to focus on? It's very big, of course. Some information around it. Reasons to migrate. Why do we see that our customers want to move away? Why is it quite difficult, specifically with these large legacy ECM suites? Then I want to talk about how we handle these legacy migrations and some specific client cases around it. I want to talk very briefly about our migration platform and how we use that, and of course, closing with some tips and tricks. Okay, first of all, a little disclaimer. So what I'm going to share in this webinar is really a Xilio view and my personal view. So we're not doing any market research, just what do we see happening. And already mentioned, FileNet is one of the many ECM systems we encounter. Also Office 365 is one of the examples of moving to the cloud. Our vision, though, really is that organizations should move to more modern content management solutions and the cloud. So what's happening in the market? It seems to be that there's this huge wave happening right now, started maybe a year ago, but we really see a rise in moving away from legacy to on-premise, moving away from legacy on-premise ECM. And a lot of it is moving towards Office 365. I think, I don't have the exact numbers, but probably we're doing 80% or something is going towards that direction, or other cloud archive solutions as a part of that. We see that active content then is moving to Office 365 and inactive or cold is moving to Azure or AWS if they don't want to be fully Microsoft. So that's really happening. And I think The reasons are that the cloud is really trusted now. It's really there. Everybody sees the benefits. All new solutions are developed there. If you want to use all the AI and cool stuff that is out there, then you really need to be in the cloud. And that realization of we need to make the best use of our information that we have, and we need to put it to use. That's really there. And of course, it's already a long time, and information is important. But we see also with development with other software vendors that it's really known now and top of the list of any CIO that it needs to be used fully, and the value is large. So that's what we see is happening. So then a little bit on FileNet ECM, a brief history. So first of all, I'm focusing now on P8. We have the most experience with that. We know IS image services as well. That's even more legacy. We have done migrations from there as well. That's quite a different system. So if people have any questions about how we did that, we can definitely talk about that another time. But right now I'm focusing on the P8 suite. And this is a history of version. Actually, I know them all. Well, knowing is not. So I've been working with all of them, implementing here within the Dutch government, and I think even we started with 3.5. And also we are encountering quite a lot of these different versions still, although the 3.5 and 4 not that many, but we're working through the list, you can say. So that's what we're focusing on. The connectors are a bit different from time to time, but this is what we have experience with. That was the history. So looking at now and future, and again, this is my personal and Exilio view. So what we see is that it remains a leader in content services, or ECM, right? I saw this focus on case management, and I think it's still IBM Case Manager, runs of course also on FileNet, and it's still there. And there was this. That's what I was working on mostly. So building solutions in that and market those when I was with Capgemini, but it hasn't. It's not as big as others, right? So. But still there, and I think the focus is also still there. It's moving to the cloud, of course, as well. The social connection is there with connections. The box integration was a very interesting one. Integration with content analytics and AI, of course, still, and it is still a leader there. However, within the ECM, I don't see that many there. And the FileNet core remains and will remain probably. So also here, I would always say, if you want to remain with FileNet because you have a strong relationship, or you need you have specific requirements, then of course stay, but move to the cloud. Personal questions I would have, and things that I would be wondering is there still enough focus on IBM ECM from an IBM global perspective, right? To build either or just focus, and also to build and develop new solutions. The leading content analytics company IBM was, right? And so why has it not really worked out? That would be one of my questions. And is there the strategy to compete with, for instance, Microsoft Cortex? Because when I see that and how it's being introduced, I actually see kind of the case management solutions I was working on. So also there, I think IBM was ahead. So those things those questions would be the questions I have, and that's what I'm thinking of. So this is just for introducing IBM FileNet and its future and what I'm thinking. And now we move back to the actual subject at hand. So migrating. And why do our customers really want to move away? And this is actual feedback from our customers. So the reasons we get back are the high licenses and support costs. And of course, it's not only with IBM and FileNet. We get the same with OpenText and Oracle and other of these more legacy ECM products. And also secondary costs that are there, right? Databases that you need and large environments of on-premise server architectures. Older software not meeting current requirements of the business users. That's one of the reasons. An important one, quite recently, again, one of the main reason actually, it's that there was older hardware still needed. It was running on Windows 2003 still, I think, server, and they didn't want to upgrade. It was too complex, but they needed to move away because there were high security risks, of course. So being exposed to security threats because of this not being able or not wanting to upgrade is also a big one. Internal support and knowledge of the system is limited, or maybe not even internal, but also external from expertise of FileNet. Old FileNet system is probably less around than Office 365 or SharePoint Online expertise. And the lack of integration capabilities is also something we get back, but that's also quite generic for on-prem, large on-prem ECM installations. So those are the reasons to migrate. And then why so many legacy FileNet instances are still around? It's one of the reasons is it's very hard to migrate away of these large implementations, especially when you think about big bang approaches. But nonetheless, they're big. They're intertwined with all kinds of organizational processes. They have been around a long time, so it's just a difficult and very complex project. So yeah, not maybe the most. It's maybe not because of this always the highest on the list, although it's becoming higher and higher, I think, and now we see the wave. So because they have been there for a long time, right? They were the ones with all the others like OpenText and some others that were first implemented to handle compliance requirements and record management in the early days, and did a really great job, of course, in that. But also that's why it's embedded very, very, very strongly in organizational processes, and it's very hard to cut out that suddenly. For instance, also with external software that has been integrated, or other software that has been integrated, for instance, capture solutions. And they have been large investments, right? And may have a lot of custom developments, and that's just hard to say goodbye to. And that's kind of a feeling, and it's maybe not really the best thing, but still it's hard to say goodbye then. However, times have changed, and there are really more modern solutions, and also, of course, being delivered by IBM ECM. But the large, the big legacy implementations on-prem, for instance, you really need to get rid of if you want to make full use of all your content. So in general, because we see this also as a legacy migration, of course, that's what we're talking about. I want to show you some approaches on that, and I'll also go into specific examples around FileNet and Office 365 that we encounter. So first of all, legacy ECM, how we define it. It's really just an ECM application, ECM system that's no longer fit for its purpose. And I'm repeating myself, but why is it no longer fit? It could be out of support, so really out of support by the vendor. There's shifting demands in business, changing content architecture, moving to the cloud, for instance, all technology, security risks, high costs, and lack of maintenance resources, as I actually said. And so we're not only talking about FileNet, just to be sure, we do a lot of live link migrations as well. It's of course, it moved to OpenText Content Server. and LiveLink is really the old version. So we see a lot of moving away from that. Same with Documentum. OpenText eDocs is kind of a different system in terms of large installations, but we see a move from out of that. I was muted, but
Sorry, Sjoerd, that was my something went wrong here.
all right, yeah, I saw this notice that I was muted.
Yeah.
Maybe it wasn't interesting. And
No,
also
no.
the older SharePoint installations, like the 2003, 2007, I think, 13, also removing a lot of customers from those systems to Office 365. So that's how we define legacy. And as an approach, we have a standardized phased approach, and all these phases have a lot of activities in them. If you're interested in looking at this in detail, there's an agile part in this as well, which I can show in more detail. But for now, I'll just stick to this. When we do a migration, we always need to start, of course, with installing our software and configuring it to connect to FileNet. We connect to the REST API there is. If there's some customizations needed, we can also connect to the database. There's always a way, and we have a lot of experience, there's always a way to get everything out. So after this configuration and installation, we go through the analysis phase, which is a very important one to really look at the quantity and the quality also of the data and the metadata in the system, to determine how the next phase, selection, mapping, and enrichment, will really look. This is the more iterative and agile phase, and this is where we really add value. So we see every migration, even these large, complex migrations of legacy systems, we see it as an opportunity to improve, not only with the system you're going to, but also to improve the content, the metadata, clean it up, restructure, add value by adding metadata or keywords. So there's a lot of different techniques we use in that phase, and that is of course very iteratively done with the business because we need that input, and also goes through analysis and goes back in workshop, etc., etc. So if anybody's interested in a more detailed worked out approach, of course, let us know in the questions and we'll get that. Transformation means making sure that everything that was determined in selection, mapping, and enrichment phase, kind of the migration design, that's also the output, that is built and configured in our migration software. We allow for customization through our own scripting language, and that gives you always the opportunity to do that little extra thing, but of course that has to be built. Importing and testing, of course, cannot go without that. And reporting. Reporting here is a separate phase, because in the end, of course, you want to report. We have the full migration audit trail. Where was it? What happened with it? And where is it now? However, reporting is done throughout the whole process. After the analysis, we have the first report. But even in that agile mapping, enrichment, selection phase, we use reporting to show what the impact of the rule is that has been determined, has been created. So reporting really throughout the whole process. And if you look at it from an solution architecture, then it looks like this. It's always this ETL process that you go through, right? You need to extract the data. We extract it into our own unified data model. It makes it very easy to say you not only have FileNet, but you also work with OpenText, Content Server, but also with Documentum. Our connectors map to our unified data model. So in that way, you have one unified way to look at it all and move it in one way, for instance, to Office 365 or any archive or any other target system. So extracting, looking at it through insights, it's a separate solution we have. Making sure you have all the migration rules you want, all the business rules implemented. run through the transformation, and the transformed data and cleaned up data you import into your new environment, and reporting throughout the whole process. So that's this very conceptual, maybe, and high level, but that's really what it all comes down to. But of course, it all starts with a plan. So I've written down just this afternoon, actually, questions to really ask yourself with regards to FileNet and Office 365 when you are thinking of or planning to do a migration. Because you need a plan, and what's the input you really need in that plan? And what do we use when we work together with our customers in this planning phase? So first of all, insights and data, the quality and quantity. Do you have that, or do you have a way to get it? That's really important to determine the exact migration plan, the details of it. What do you need in terms of enrichment? How's the quality, but also the quantity? How long is it going to take, etc. Is record management part of the solution? It's probably a very easy question to ask, but it does require on our side some different work. We need a different connector to the records management part, or an extended one. And also thinking about Office 365 and records management, there might be a separate solution, although they say they have it all. I think still, for instance, FileNet goes way. If you look at records management and compliancy, it's more complete. So what do you want to do with it then? Just knowing if that is really an important part of it is a good question to ask. Are you using Workflow, Business Process Manager? Of course, a very important or much used part of IBM FileNet system configurations we see. So how do you want to handle workflow? Do you want to migrate the workflow as it is going? That's going to be difficult, going to be complex. Other BPM processes, it's good to know this and also what the customer would want to do with it. What do you have any capture like Kovacs or IBM solution of themselves, or forms solutions that integrate, or are there any other integrations to take into account? This is actually quite an important one also in how you want to execute the migration in the end, to know this. Also the integrations you have, you might want to take on certain phases because of certain integrations. That's also what we sometimes encounter. So can you identify, and what is then the definition of cold or inactive and active content? It's a very important one, I think, because you don't want to move it all to an active environment. So if we take Office 365, if you want to work with Teams or in SharePoint sites, then probably not. You don't want to take all that 15-year-old content with you. So move that to an archive where it's still reachable if needed, but you really want to make that split. Are the owners of the content and the system known? Are they involved, and are they interviewed also to capture their requirements? Same for the experts of the system. It's a different role than the owner we see. Performance measures, extract and import. It's very important to know if you want to start with planning. It depends on all kinds of things you have in your architecture, etc. Of course, what the performance can be, but rule of thumb is that with our FileNet to Office 365 migrations, is that you really should take time for the extract, because of the way it's set up, and the new, I do have to say, the new Office 365 migration API really allows for large volume import. So that's less of an issue, but you do need to know it. Of course, also you want to ask yourself, how does your dot on the horizon for your content management environments your content management landscape look, because you want to work from there, and it does have impact on your decisions maybe. Is there an Office 365 implementation and adoption plan? Is it known? And how does the migration connect to that? Because I think it's a very important one to link up with the implementation, and not only to Office 365, but any new or modern content services solution. And of course, very important is their support from leadership, and do they understand what's happening? Do they understand that there are going to be different phases of migrating, and that they need to, that business users need to have time to test, etc. And are they supporting that? So a very important box to check. Then some migration references, and unfortunately, most of the times on our FileNet accounts, it's not really allowed to share the customer name. It's large financial institutions, but there's one very large one in Europe. We did actually a legacy to on-premise for FileNet as well, so that went to FileNet cloud environment next to Office 365. We did it through one of our partners, Capgemini, together with them, and it was really a really large one, billion documents, and we set up a massive migration server architecture as well to get to the performance that was required. And I think, but I'm not sure, and I can look it up. I'm sorry I didn't, because these are interesting numbers. But I'm sure, but I think we made like over 1 million for sure documents a day in the extract, and that was also what was needed with one server, so we could scale that. And in the end of the day, I think we had 30 or something. But yeah, I will, if anybody wants that information, I can hand it over to you separately from this webinar. A large financial organization in New York, they were actually moving away from different FileNet versions, so older versions, to the newest. I think it was then 5.3 or 5.2 P8. So it's also an interesting, and actually not only FileNet version, but also other ECM solutions. So they also had Oracle Web Center content, a lot of custom stuff in Sybase databases, etc. But they moved to a new P8, and they're still using it to sync environments. And there's a lot of Dutch government moving away from legacy and FileNet to modern cloud, FileNet, and on-prem as well still. So choosing for on-prem. Then on the Office 365 side, there's this large global engineering management and consultancy firm that were moving hundreds of millions of documents to Azure and Office 365. Here, it's coming from LiveLink. And the large financial institution in the UK is doing the same, actually, only they're not moving it to Azure, but to AWS, because they want to split their chances, I think, with Microsoft and Amazon. And many Dutch agencies, separate from the FileNet ones, also are moving many different legacy systems and their file shares to Office 365 using Xilio. So these are some of the references I can share. If anybody is interested in specific references, they can let us know. We can talk about it separately. So I think we're close to the end. I want to talk quickly about Xilio and content migration. So our platform. So one of the important parts of our platform is our own scripting environment and language, to just add that extra 20% of requirements that are needed, and to make it easy to do that. So next to a lot of pre-configured and a lot of templating and transformation, there's always this opportunity to use the IDE to build your custom transformation. And I think that's a very powerful part of our platform. Xilio Pipe, it's the ETL process manager. So whatever transformation you have, you can link it up in this sort of workflow in this ETL process to being done. Our unified data model, I already talked about that. We map all our connectors map to our data model. It allows for adding custom fields because, of course, everything is custom, but it does remain in the same model. So we can easily report on it. We can show insights, visualizations, always in the same way. Our connectors, our API, and some additional content services. I hope this is not too disturbing because someone is. So no. I should. Okay, sorry. Someone's drilling in the wall here. Our content insights dashboard is one of our main. We use that to generate insights to determine migration business rules. And our other services are business rules deduplication and classification. But any additional content services we are able to add into the process, so into that ETL process manager. So for instance, you need to create a PDF from this old format. You need to do some classification of images. We don't have that, but we link it up in the process through Xilio Pipe, and you can use it. Some of our connectors. This is not everything, but we have a lot. Our content service offerings. So Perdy, can I ask you, is it still, is it a lot of noise around me?
It's a bit of noise, but we can still hear you.
Okay.
It's always a problem when you have a new house. Eh?
Sorry?
It's always a problem when you are owning a new house.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry about that. I'll move away a little bit.
We can hear you.
So our content services offerings we are offering towards the market is content analysis and insights. So that insights module we have, it's actually a separate product because we see that also it's interesting to just be aware to work within your within the customer themselves to work on a strategy, to create awareness, to get input for governance, really even separately from a migration context. However, of course, many of the times a sort of migration comes from it. So content migrations, the core of our propositions, we provide a safe, controllable content migration with a lot of transformation capabilities from a lot of sources to a lot of targets. And what we see is that there's this continuous need for modernization of information landscapes with many of our customers. And this is more of a combination of migration and integration, but also insights. So it's a combination of all, but it provides a continuous capability to move around content, to transform, and used by our customers themselves. So to close up, I've got some tips and tricks. So let's go through them. Always start with an analysis of the actual content and metadata. It's very important. Sometimes organizations think they know, and they know how much is in it because also the system has a counter and you can see it. But too many times we have encountered that if we really look at it, we identify certain processes that certain people weren't aware of anymore, especially with these older legacy systems. It's very good to look at the actual data. And I think I've already mentioned, but you should, and this should also be really with the leadership in the customer organization, look at a migration as an opportunity to improve, and not just as necessary evil because you chose a new solution and you need to move over. It is really an opportunity. Of course, you want to preserve all important metadata and maybe even all metadata, but things change, and also the way we look at metadata and how metadata is used. I think it's very, very, very important still, but also we see customers just trying to map everything and that can be unnecessary work. So just look at it, and what you look at it from a perspective what you really need. Don't do a lift and shift, but take a rolling or a per department approach in your migration. No big bang. We're really, especially with Office 365, where it's always quite possible to create a different implementation, but also, I guess, with FileNet, a different implementation per business unit or per department. You really want to take that opportunity as well to give them some specific business rules in the migration. So it's very hard, first of all, to do a big bang migration, but also it creates a lot of extra value if you allow for specific business rules per department. Performance, it's already mentioned, but you really should check this as soon as possible. Both extract and import is very important input for your migration planning. Moving cold or inactive content to a cloud archive is something we really think is something you should look into. And actually, a lot of our customers are, especially of the larger, older ECM implementations, are doing specifically that. Consider if it's very difficult to cut it out of the architecture, even if you're facing, if you're using a phased approach. Maybe the business really wants that new system already, and that's why you're keeping two. Then you can consider integration to enable migration of an old large ECM system. So you integrate from the new system, you still have the opportunity, and then you slowly and in a very controlled way go migrating everything. And of course, it's quite an open door, but you should involve the users from the very start of the process and in every step of the way of it. Okay, I think that was, or I know for sure that was my final slide. I think I saw one question coming. We have time for some questions.
Yes, that's correct, Sjoerd. You mentioned performance and your tips and tricks. There's a question about performance, and is what kind of performance Xilio can get out of extracting from FileNet and migrating into Office 365.
Yeah, so as I said, I don't have the exact number. So Office 365, I know it still depends on the architecture and what the bandwidth is, etc. But we can get into from 1 terabyte to 5 terabytes a day, depending also on the size of the documents, the amounts of metadata, etc. And the same is valid for I think around the same per server to FileNet instance is, but then I'm talking about 1 million documents, around from 1 to 5 million, and I think we managed 30 million documents a day extracting. But as I also said, I don't have the exact numbers, but I can get them to the one asking the question, Purdy. So I'll follow up with this.
Yeah, great, thanks. All right, well, meanwhile, I wanted to tell you again that you can use the chat box if you have any questions, or the Q&A. There's another question, and it's asking if there's any difference between your migration approach between different verticals, different industries.
Okay. Yeah, no, not really our approach. It's the same. There might be more focus on getting some custom. So what we see is that there are different implementations. For instance, if I take FileNet or other ECM solutions as well, they have created really a specific solution for an industry, for instance, healthcare or finance, or so there are some differences there. If you encounter custom stuff that you need to connect to a separate database to get out data, or things like that. But in general, our approach always remains the same. So we always follow this ETL process, and there's a lot of focus on getting the migration rules and adding value.
Okay, well, I hope that answers the question. That's it for the questions I've seen so far. So
Okay.
shoot if you have any other questions. Meanwhile, I'm happy to say that we have recorded this one, and we will send you the recording today or tomorrow, together with the presentation. And yeah, if you have any questions, you can see here we have an email for this webinar. It's called webinar@cdo.com. So let us know if something pops up later today. Yeah, I think we're done, Sjoerd. I want to thank you again for your presentation.
Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.
Thank you,
Hope to see you
Birdie.
next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.